Hawkeyes Forever asks, what will Iowa's offense look like in 2025? Obviously, Hawkeyes Forever is a Hawkeyes fan. And we don't talk much about Iowa on this channel, but the Iowa offense has been memed in previous years for being wholly ineffective, rather vomit-worthy when you actually watch them. And after a while of projectile vomiting, because you can't believe that, well, whether it's their offensive line can't block or they're rolling out Deacon Hill at quarterback, at some point you just have to laugh at how inept the whole thing is. Well, that was 2022. That was 2023. In 2024, Iowa actually had a sneakily competent offense. And they didn't even start the right quarterback. I think Sullivan should have been starting for the full year in hindsight. I mean, the Hawkeyes finished 6th in the Big Ten while playing a honestly pretty respectable schedule. And they won some games with Jackson Stratton at quarterback. And at one point, I think maybe it was Jackson Stratton who was the converted linebacker. They had a converted linebacker to quarterback in their room. Actually, I think it was Jackson Stratton, but correct me if I'm wrong. Either he was starting or playing, competing in that room because McNamara was done for the year. Sullivan was done for the year. Sullivan now has since left the program, and Mark Gronowski, transfer from South Dakota State University, won some national championships there at the FCS level, is projected to be the starter at QB. I'm high on him, but we'll talk about him in a bit. Iowa went from scoring 15.4. In my head, I had 15. Then I, clicked the previous year button on sportsreference.com. Yup, 15.4 points per game in 2023. 132nd out of 133 teams in all the FBS in scoring offense. 15.4 points per game. They had a point differential that year of +9 with a 10-4 record. That's because they lost 35-0 to Tennessee. They lost 35-0 to Penn State. They lost, or it was 31-0, my apologies. They lost 12-10 to Minnesota and then 26-0 to Michigan. All of their other opponents, excluding Utah State, Western Michigan, Michigan State, and Rutgers, they beat by single digits. That was a grotesque season for Iowa football. And a defense, quite honestly, that was wasted. If the 2023 defense, which had most of the starters of the 2024 unit, but much better play in the secondary, if that defense had the 2024 offense, which scored 27.7 points per game, 72nd nationally, and they had a strength of schedule in the regular season at least that I think was tougher. Just playing Michigan and Tennessee in the postseason in 23 was tougher than playing Missouri in last year's postseason. An offense that nearly doubled its points per game output. A defense that still only allowed 17.8 points per game. It was 11th. They had some rough performances like against Ohio State, for example. Troy and Iowa State early in the year. Michigan State butchered them. But overall, the defense wasn't the problem. Defense got a little bit worse, and the offense, while much better, because of some of the travel to places like UCLA, for example, or Minnesota, Ohio State, Maryland. I mean, they had some road games where you're going into tough environments or you're going across several time zones or states. It's hard, especially when you win so many close games the prior year and you regress to the mean in that way. Iowa was actually a top 25 power rated team last year despite having an 8-5 record because they blew out Washington. They blew out Northwestern. They destroyed Wisconsin. They beat Minnesota. I would say beat Minnesota to a pulp. What I classify beating a team to a pulp as is you beat them by double their score. So they score 14, you score 28. Iowa scored 31 in a Minnesota team that only scored 14 against them. Of course, if it's 14-7, I don't know if I'd classify that. But once you get into the double digits of scoring and you score twice what your opponent did, that's sort of what I classify as beating your opponent to a pulp. So Iowa's offense improved. It should get even better this year. When I look at the Hawkeyes depth chart, yes, they lose Caleb Johnson to the Steelers, wonderful running back. I do wonder at times whether he was their entire offense or whether he was just a piece of the puzzle. Iowa's offensive line was rated highly last year. It was rated as one of the best, if not the best in America per Pro Football Focus. But obviously Caleb Johnson made the line look really good. I still think it's solid. They bring back Logan Jones at center, Jennings Dunker, Bo Steffens, got guys like Jack Doltzer and Cade Piper, I think, ready to step up. Addison Ostrengan, Zach Ortworth are back at tight end as some contributors after Luke Lachey has left. They return their entire contributing wide receiver core, Jacob Gill, who led the team last year as a wide receiver with 411 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. They bring back Reese Vanderzee, who kind of came on the scene as a true freshman. I would expect him to get better after having a somewhat solid year. I'd say a great year for an Iowa true freshman wide receiver. Gronowski's interesting because I think he is definitely an upgrade for sure over any quarterback who's come through Iowa's doors since Nate Stanley left for the NFL. Mark Gronowski, last season, 2024, 2,721 yards through the air, 23 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and he's had more successful seasons than that. He had a year in 2023 with 3,000 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 5 picks, a 179.7 passer rating, and he completed nearly 70% of his throws. I mean, you look at Minnesota, a rival of Iowa. We just got finished, if you were watching this live, just got finished talking about Nebraska, a rival of Iowa. Now we're talking about the quarterback of Minnesota, a chief rival of Iowa, and Max Brosmer, who's now with the Minnesota Vikings, I believe, as an undrafted free agent. Brosmer at New Hampshire never had a passer rating above a 146.2. And he didn't win a national championship at the FCS level like Gronowski did. With receivers coming back, with an O-line that I still think is going to be one of the Big Ten's and consequentially nation's top O-line, with Kamari Moulton and Jason Patterson, and then a defensive line. This isn't the offense, but still it helps to have a good defense that can give your offense some wiggle room and margin for error. Max Llewellyn, Aaron Graves, Jeremiah Pittman, Ethan Herkett. I quietly think that this Iowa defensive line will be superior to what it was last year, especially with the additions of Jonah Pace, Bryce Hawthorne. I think a player like Kenneth Merriweather who could be ready to step up in that room. This should be an offense that, if last year's could score 27 points per game, with a much better quarterback, a mobile quarterback, an O-line that I think resembled more of a 2010s Iowa O-line than the 21, 22, or 23 unit, with a group of solid tight ends, and probably, I would hope so, Iowa's best wide receiver core since the COVID year, or since 2019, when they had Amir Smith-Marset. You're thinking maybe you can score in the 30s, like hit 30 points per game, 31, maybe 32. Why not? I think that should be the expectation, that you field a top 60 scoring offense, or one that's at least closing in on being top 50, because then you're just above half in the FBS. There's about, I think, 139 FBS teams this year, 136, so on. So being top 60 puts you in the top half of the FBS offenses. And with how much the defense loses, if Iowa doesn't want to have a losing record, I would say that they're going to have to take steps forward on the offense. I think they will. I think that Gronowski is going to be a quarterback who, while I wouldn't place him in the top half of Big Ten quarterbacks, I think the Big Ten is super deep. And I mean super deep. I think it's the deepest conference in America this year with quarterback play, especially in relationship to potential. I think Gronowski is definitely a top third quarterback in the FBS. Could be even better than that. Has the potential to be a top 25 quarterback, especially as he's in Tim Lester's system longer. Kamari Moulton. I mean, if Iowa's O-line was the story and it wasn't entirely Caleb Johnson, Moulton could be a 1,000-yard rusher, and Patterson could have success as well. I do think Iowa's offense will take steps forward. The problem is there is a floor there with Johnson leaving, with some of the offensive line departure, with Gronowski coming off of an injury, the fact that the wide receiver room is still limited. And then you look at their schedule, Iowa State on the road, and I think Matt Campbell's finally figured out the Iowa thing a little bit. Rutgers on the road. I'm not talking about UAlbany and UMass. Those should be auto wins. Indiana at home, Wisconsin on the road, Penn State at home, Minnesota at home, Oregon at home, USC on the road, Michigan State at home, Nebraska on the road. Those are 10 schools who will at least have competent defenses, which means with some of the limitations Iowa has on offense and the fact that all of those teams I think will also field competent offenses, Iowa could lose any of those 10 games. They could. So you may not see the offense take steps forward in the analytics and statistics, even if it is a more complete unit, and they're not just a run-first offense that has to pass if need be, which is really what they were, especially in the early part of last year in the final few games when they had Cade McNamara or Jackson Stratton at quarterback. Sullivan, with his dual-threat ability, I think gave them some wrinkles in the passing game and definitely an even deadlier, scarier edge on the ground. And I wonder if that could be Iowa's offense this year too, because Gronowski is mobile. He's much more mobile certainly than Cade McNamara. I don't know if he's as mobile as Brennan Sullivan, but I think he is. Probably has potential to be even better given his track record in the FCS as one of their best QBs. So to answer your question, Hawkeyes Forever, I think the Iowa offense will look a bit more balanced. I think there will be more passing involved. I don't think you will see as many third and long handoffs where because Caleb Johnson can just break so many tackles and bounce off defenders and just has such impressive feet and a will to fight, your best option on third down is going to be more so toward Gronowski and maybe either his legs or his throwing capability rather than having a running back who should have been a Heisman Trophy finalist being able to convert a third and long because he's just that good and he has one of the most experienced veteran NFL-like offensive lines in the entire country. That's, in a nutshell, as sort of a maybe run-on thesis statement, what I think Iowa's offense will be. They will be much better at passing the ball. I think a little bit worse at running the ball that somewhat takes away how large that edge of growth in the passing game is. But it will be Iowa's best offense easily since 2019 or 2020. I forget how good the 2020 offense is. So let me fact check myself first. I don't exactly remember that. It scored 31.8 points per game. That offense did, and Tyler Goodson was an all Big Ten running back that year. Yeah, so it'll be the best offense since 2020. Could be better. Could be the best since 2019 with Nate Stanley at quarterback. They have a tough schedule ahead of them. There's a lot of work to do on defense. Phil Parker's a wizard. I have a lot of respect for him. So if the defense reloads in maybe a way that many outsiders think is unexpected, and what I think is true on offense comes true, you could have a very exciting year of Iowa football, and I think regardless the year will be exciting because of the losses on defense that give some uncertainty there, but also the cautious optimism about the QB situation and the offensive line, maybe even a bit of a receiver, and just Tim Lester having a second year to positively impact this Hawkeye offense.